We got another roguelite for yous guys. Took me quite some time to get the hang of it, but once I did, I found myself enjoying this fun, albeit flawed, turn-based roguelite. Star Renegades, ladies and gentlemen. Take on the evil Imperium as you liberate a few planets from their destructive whims. Choose your battles wisely as you progress on each procedurally generated map. Unlock new characters to diversify your builds on each run. Swear in frustration at the lack of properly communicating information to the player. Grit your teeth at the inconsistencies in combat. Ugh. Roll your eyes at the lengthy times it takes to do a single run for a game in the roguelite genre. But at the end of the day, still booted up for another run because the pros generally outweigh the cons here and still leave you entertained and having fun. So join me and open them ear and eye holes as we dive into Star Renegades. Well, hello, my patient gaming friends. Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer here, and today we got a cool and unique experience, and that of Star Renegades, pixel graphic turn-based roguelite. Developed by Massive Damage Inc. and released in September of 2020, Star Renegades has been sitting in my library since the Pliocene era, and I finally got around to giving it a try. This is another title that I'd have to give a side thumb or neutral option here, as I think some may enjoy it and others may find it simply too frustrating given its flaws. Star Renegades has you being involved in an interdimensional takeover from the evil Imperium. Your job is to destroy them in your dimension with the accompaniment of a robot that travels between dimensions to assist you. If you fail a run, the robot moves on to the next dimension where you have access to the same character pool. If you win, there are other dimensions in peril, so the robot goes to assist those as well. Fun idea for explaining the replayability aspects of roguelites anyways. Pretty neat. Upon first glance, Star Renegades seems like a fairly simple endeavor. Standard roguelite mechanics with turn-based combat, we've seen plenty like it before, but as soon as you get a little deeper in, you realize that it's much more complex than that and find that there are quite a bit of details under the surface that appear to bring depth to the game. But then as you play even more, you realize that the complexity here really isn't that complex at all once you figure out the formula and find out how to win nearly every battle with ease. Mostly. I'll get into that later in the criticism segment of the video. For now, what's the positives? Well, there's quite a bit, I'd say. But first, let me ask that if you enjoy the video, please throw it a like, subscribe, share it with your fellow roguelite fans to help me grow the channel. Would be much appreciated. Thank you. Breakdown. So for starters, Star Renegades' gameplay loop, I would say, is fun. You make your way through various maps on each planet you're meant to liberate, and you can take a path of your choice in order to get specific upgrades or items that might benefit your current build on any given run. Bit of player agency there, not bad. This includes things as gaming credits to buy new items at the end of each planet, DNA, which is used to upgrade your characters up to a max level of 10, and you can't max out them all, only maybe 1 or 2 per run. You can also pick up armor and shields on the map, and then items of different rarities. Armor is an HP buffer that negates the amount of damage before it hits your health pool. It does not mitigate damage to shields, however, so keep that in mind. Shields, on the other hand, is probably your most important resource in combat as they regenerate after each fight, unlike your health, which can only be healed while camping, more on that later, or a health pickup on the map. So shields are a must the majority of the time as they are the first thing to negate damage to your health pool. Now the different items you will find on maps or in shops after liberating a planet are things like weapons, armor items, implants that buff shields, attack speed or delays, things like that. They range from common all the way up to legendary rarity with its orange sexiness. There's a fairly decent item pool here, but they're all mostly stat increases when upgrading and aren't particularly unique for the most part, unfortunately. Still, they are important as they do make your character significantly stronger if you get lucky with the RNG and get some decent legendaries or epics anyways. So as stated before, the gameplay loop finds you traversing a map of each planet. Each map will have multiple routes you can take, and you will breach into some sections and as a result be locked out of other sections on the map. I found this rather enjoyable. I know it's not a particularly new concept, as it's just a different iteration of most roguelite mapping such as Slay the Spires for instance, but here it's much more visual and interactive and there's lots more routes you can choose. I think it's a fun take on map traversal when strategizing your battles and what routes to take. Each planet has you taking 3 days to traverse the map before you face the boss. You are granted 3 breaches a day, after which night comes and you have to rest at camp. Now in camp, you are granted the opportunity to have your characters beef up their relationships by using cards with buffs that also grant relationship points. Each card has a cost and there is a limit to how many you can play each rest. When you reach relationship milestones between 2 characters, they get additional buffs and eventually a powerful combo ability that costs Fury, which is the resource used to cast special abilities in combat. These can be game-changing in battle to seemingly useless depending on the combo. Some might do devastating single target or AoE damage, while others might just regenerate a small sum of shields for your entire party. All depends on the character combinations. And keep in mind that after each run, the relationships are wiped because every new run you are using the same characters, but from a different dimension if we're going by the story and lore. I thought this was a cool mechanic, and if done properly, you can find up to 4 of your characters in max relationships so they can have some nice combos to assist them in hard fights with the baddies. Speaking of, battles will be where most of your time is spent in Star Renegades, outside of copious amounts of repetitive dialogue and banter, that is. The combat, upon first glance, comes off as complex and deep. You have a variety of different attack elements such as pyro that burns enemies, plasma that melts shields, or antimatter that eats away at armor, among others. But as you learn the game, you'll realize that, yes, there are a lot of different systems here at play, but you will find that the winning formula is pretty much stacking shields and shield regen, and then stacking stagger or delay mechanics. What does this mean? Star Renegades uses a timeline combat system, meaning during each battle, attacks from you and the enemy will be queued along a timeline that you can see up here. You will be able to see who's attacking next based on that timeline. However, the game has a stagger mechanic which will debuff the enemy, or you, knocking them back in the timeline and thus moving their turn farther towards the back of the line, depending on how many seconds your stagger delays them. This is also affected by attack speed, where a higher attack speed will grant your units the ability to attack before the enemy and more times if they have enough attack speed. On top of that, you have times where you will be granted crits that allow for more bonuses such as increased damage and destroying armor. This is all pretty interesting, but unfortunately predictable and easily exploited. It makes battles much easier than they appear on the surface, but it's a grueling task to get to that point if you don't take the time to read about all the systems on some wiki or something, or if you don't watch like this video here. More on that later as well in the criticism sections, so yeah, bear with me, my friends. So at the end of the day, all you really need to do is invest heavily in characters that specialize in shields and shield regen, and ultimately stagger mechanics such as the Saboteur, and just make it so every round your enemies basically don't get a chance to attack before killing them. Granted, you can't do this indefinitely, they will always get a chance to attack eventually because stagger does have its limits, but you can often kill off enemies before it ever gets to that point, unless it's a boss or elite fight naturally. But when they do attack, your shield guys will be able to negate the damage and regen the shields just fine for the most part. Easy peasy, beautiful cover girl. Now, despite the exploitable combat system, I still would say it's enjoyable for the most part. You can make it more difficult for yourself by simply not using stagger and shield characters, but you likely won't win the match, to be honest. And that's another criticism to add to the tab. But I found that in combat there is enough variety in mechanics and uniqueness to your characters that it keeps things fresh and fun, even though it's a bit easy when your party is built right, and simply far too difficult if it's built wrong. So take that as you will. The enemy variety is also fairly well done here. There's a decent pool of enemies with unique mechanics that makes the fights diverse and challenging in their own ways if you're not paying attention especially. Even if you have the winning formula, you still need to make sure you're reading all the tooltips, if you can anyways, and gauge what each enemy does or is immune to or resistant to, because that can have a detrimental effect on your fight. Still, this is a mixed bag as some boss and elite fights feel sort of cheap at times and just ew. Aesthetically though, Star Renegades is a feast for the eyes. The artist did a fantastic job here and the game looks beautiful with its pixel art sprites and flashy animations. Although sometimes that can be a little too flashy if I'm being honest, but if you're a fan of seizures and epilepsy, then you're in for a treat. Woo! There's also a great deal of humor in the game that varies from funny to cheesy. Being one of the most subjective things on the planet, I won't judge the humor here. I'll leave that to you as an individual, but personally, I enjoyed it. I thought it was funny and lighthearted. The game obviously doesn't take itself too seriously, which I very much appreciate. Now, the music is pretty damn good in my awesomely humble opinion. Composed by Steve London, it brings me some Shadowrun vibes with this futuristic sci-fi energy that's quite a treat. It has a bit of retro wave tinge there that's very apt for the theme and setting of Star Renegades. I found it to be atmospheric and immersive without breaking into repetitive, you know what I mean? That said, I am the kind of guy who can listen to the same song over and over non-stop and never grow tired of it. I mean, take a listen to my Root Woven Sanctuary Eye repeat video from the World of Warcraft soundtrack if you feel me. So some might find it repetitive at times, but I thoroughly enjoy the music myself, so yeah, break down. Now, all that said, with the positives aside, what issues do I have with Star Renegades, my gaming peeps? What are my criticisms? Well, for starters, although I found myself enjoying the combat for the most part, the difficulty spikes on bosses and elites is astronomical. I highly recommend that if you play the game, to start in easy difficulty because it is far more fun and lets you experiment more than normal mode. The difficulty differences between easy and normal is ginormous, like night and day, black and white, tacos and cheeseburgers, I don't know. You will find yourself plowing through the basic mobs no problem, and then hitting an elite pack or boss and you'll just be obliterated. Bosses and elites will do so much damage that they may one-shot some of your backline if you don't have the setup to defend them. They'll wipe out the shields of your tanks in one hit as well while you chink away at their HP or armor because they have quite literally thousands of health and shields. And they'll also just disintegrate your armor as well, no matter how much you have. It's very frustrating. Now, this is a problem you will face mostly early on until you figure out the aforementioned winning formula that I spoiled for you here. But even then, these fights come off as more frustrating than fun at times, unfortunately. I rarely found myself enjoying the boss fights, and the enemy boss will often have some nonsense mechanic that just feels cheap, man. One example is the moon-based boss fight. This bitch has an extremely irritating mechanic where she lays out 3 bombs, and if you attack any of them, she will attack you for tremendous amounts of damage. She'll attack you on top of that anyways though. Problem is, the game has a frontline mechanic, so if you don't have a sniper or ranged ability that can reach the backline, then you're shit out of luck because you will literally have no way to attack the boss and either have to rely on taking copious amounts of damage from attacking her bombs, or just try to defend each round to then attack her after the bombs go off. Now, she's beatable, I've beaten her plenty of times, but when you first come up against her and have no idea what she's capable of, you're just screwed unless you got lucky in your party build early on when starting the round. It's just not fun in my opinion, unfortunately. I feel it's very poorly designed and just one example of how some of these boss fights can be more frustrating than fun and challenging in that they basically force you to build your party in a specific way rather than use skill to overcome them. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these battles are just a numbers game which you will lose if you don't have the right setup. Boo. The final boss fight is a prime example of this and just poorly designed all around in my opinion. It's just not good at all, I feel. So a little bit of a spoiler here, but the game doesn't really have much in story, so I guess it doesn't really matter, but you've been warned nonetheless, so you might want to skip ahead a minute if you care, and I'll give you some time to do that. But now, in the final boss fight, you defeat them, and then a random Deus Ex Machina piece of shit vat thing pops up and revives them. So you have to defeat them again while fighting the vat as well. It's not fun in the least. Super frustrating, and that's even on easy mode. Mind you, before this, the boss is no slouch and summons dual adds, and they all have a plethora of armor and health, so it takes like a dozen rounds to whittle them down, just to have some stupid thing revive the boss after you beat them once. The boss also has an AoE attack that hits everyone for 100 plus bleed damage after their turn, so they end up nearly one-shotting everyone in the backline if you don't have the perfect setup to block the damage. Not fun. And on top of that, in the final ship where you fight the boss, you have to guard your little robot companion that is carrying a bomb. If the robot gets brought to 0 health, the bomb explodes, hitting everyone in your party. Woohoo! So all of your team can be at 100% health, but if the stupid robot gets down to nothing because of some BS, then it's nearly game over because the bomb will just wipe you all out. And it doesn't help that almost every enemy will focus fire the robot during each battle, which means you must have some units that can defend it, or buff its shields and whatnot, or else you just lose. So sorry. Sad to say, that is some poor boss fight design in my opinion, and I didn't figure this out the first time I got to the end game as I didn't have any characters that could guard it, and so it just got blown up and I lost the run after several hours. So infuriating. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Jarek, you're meant to die over and over and restart each run in roguelites. Yes, that's true, I know, I'm dumb, I'm a moron, but why this is so frustrating is because of another criticism I have with Star Renegades. Each run can take 4 hours, like 3 to 4 hours, no exaggeration. Once you learn the game more, you can knock that down to maybe 2, but if you really are involved in reading all the tooltips, planning out and executing your routes to fight as many mobs as possible, and do the side content such as the moon base or Imperium ships, you can get 4 hours per run easy. So when you're 4 hours in and finally reach the end boss just to have them be revived when all your guys are at low or no health, or just to have one of their adds 1 or 2 shot your robot, that's all that time just gone in the blink of an eye. Poof. And yes, naturally this is a roguelite, so you are meant to restart and replay over and over, but when it's a 2 to 4 hour run, it just feels bad, man. It doesn't feel good losing in this manner like, say, Grifflands does, where, they can have like a 1 or 2 hour, maybe 3 hour run in Grifflands, and when you lose, it feels fine. It feels fair, because the journey is still pretty fun and doesn't feel as cheap with all the bosses and stuff like the in-game boss in Star Renegades. Because you don't always face the same enemies, elites, or mini-bosses for that matter either in Star Renegades. Which brings up another criticism. being forced to build your party a certain way. You don't really have as much build diversity as you think. If you want to go glass cannon with the pew-pews, you're going to lose, probably at the first boss. If you want to go full tank, you're going to lose because you'll just get whittled down over time due to having no damage to break the enemy's shields or armor, and they'll be able to break your armor like no sweat, even the non-elites. Nope, you have to build a specific way in order to achieve success, and that sucks. But once you figure that out, you can then just steamroll most enemies until you get to the bullshit bosses. That said, you can build a good setup with varying characters. You don't always have to choose the same ones. For instance, there are multiple tanky characters, multiple support characters, multiple damage characters, but some are just far better than others. The balance isn't the best here, unfortunately. The Saboteur, for example, is always one of the best damage dealers because they can stagger the enemy like crazy. The Aegis is the best tanky/support shield character because she has a huge amounts of shield and can regen while also guarding other units so she can tank their damage. The Guardian is the best HP tank because he regenerates after every battle and has a high HP pool. Things like that can pigeonhole you into using the same characters over and over if you're struggling. Now, this isn't as much of a problem on easy mode, but even then, if you want to beat the run and defeat the final boss, you can't do it with just any character setup. Found that out the hard way, and my brown starfruit is still sore. And it doesn't help that when you beat a run, it replaces the end boss with a character from your party pool. So when that character is the new end boss, they're locked out from you being able to pick them until you defeat them in the next run. Why? I have no idea. In Star Renegades, itemization isn't that great for the most part either. The items are all stat sticks or armor. They don't really grant any huge game-changing mechanics. Sure, some grant fury on hit, or some might change the damage type the character does, so they'll do nitro instead of pyro or something. But for the most part, it's just extra shields or more HP or higher percentage in damage. There's also no class-specific items that would change things up, like converting the Guardian's HP to all shields or changing the Archon's AoE attacks to a higher single target attack or something so that would completely switch up the build and the combat. There's nothing like that, unfortunately. That would have brought some really cool variation to the combat and builds that would make replayability less samey, because as it is now, each run is fairly similar. I still enjoy them because I think the gameplay loop is still fun for the most part, but there just isn't much variation from one run to the next. On occasion, you might be able to do like a side quest that unlocks a new character, but ultimately it's kind of samey. There are also a lot of technical and UI issues with Star Renegades that can be a huge problem in the perfect storm. For starters, traversing the map can be a slog because your party will often get stuck on terrain due to poor pathfinding, like your dudes are all blind people whose exes rearranged their furniture in their apartment after they got dumped, you know, that kind of thing. You can hold the sprint button to move faster though, as well as toggle always run in the options menu, so keep that in mind if you do decide to play the game because it's a game changer and kind of helps a lot. There's also copious amounts of clicking in the UI when shifting through menus and whatnot. For instance, when you open an item chest and want to see more information on what items your characters have, it usually blocks off the text of their equipped items, so you have to click to the inventory and then click each character you want to check and then click their items rather than simply having it all shown on the item choosing menu. Just click, 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 click. It really feels like the game wastes your time a lot in that regard. So much time is spent waiting for a mini cutscene to pass that shows the bosses or banter, while in the merchant menus you can't make adjustments to your inventory such as selling items or equipping them. You have to exit out and go to the squad menu and then inventory to do all that. It's just very odd design decisions. This is pretty egregious and sucks a lot of time out of the game because you will be clicking through so many menus to get to things that should just be easily accessible or on a hotkey or something. And another major UI issue is during combat, when there are a lot of units on the screen, it is very difficult to click on units because they overlap and cover each other. That's a huge problem, but not as huge as the issue of the game not properly communicating information to the player. Part of this is due to UI problems, such as the enemy models being so hideously obese that they block the tooltip so you can't see what's going on down the timeline. Or there will be many times when enemies will simply have actions or reactions that aren't shown in the tooltip, which often leads to devastating results for your party. How this works is that you generally can click on an enemy to see what attacks they'll be doing, what buffs and debuffs they have activated, or what damage type or mechanic they have that will affect you each turn. Now, ignore the fact that the UI is so janky that it often takes multiple clicks or pinpoint clicks just to be able to see this information if you don't want to use a hotkey, because you can play the game with just the mouse for the most part if you're on PC like me. But oftentimes the enemy will do things that simply does not show up in the tooltip. Like, why? This is most egregious in boss fights. The tooltip will say the boss will do one thing, but then they'll do another, like a completely different thing. Or they'll do that one thing and then another on top of that because the tooltip won't show that they have a follow-up attack or reaction. I have had fights where the boss kept regenerating their shields and nowhere in the tooltip does it say that they'll do that. I also had fights where it would show I would do a huge amount of damage with, say, a combo attack, only to have it do a minuscule fraction of the damage predicted because likely I'm assuming it didn't take into account the boss's armor. Or sometimes it would show that I would destroy their armor just to have it take like no damage. It's so weird. Or on the flip side, it will say an enemy won't even destroy my shields with an attack, but then they hit me and they wipe out my shields and like a quarter of my health. It was just happening for some reason, I don't know, all the time. Super inconsistent and infuriating. Yes, ma'am. This is compounded by the fact that if you stagger them and bump them further down the timeline, it may also change some of their reactions, yet it doesn't show that in the tooltips. No fun, no bueno, nicht gut. This is a huge problem and probably what I found to be the most frustrating negative with the game. This makes fights far more difficult than they should be. Properly communicating information to the player is key, and if you muck that up, you're going to have an unhappy player. That said, for the most part, you can generally know what's going on with the tooltips. It's just a few occasions where they get messed up, and again, it's mostly because of the boss fights. The problem is, those few occasions tend to be the most difficult and game-ending, such as the final boss in the game. Ew, gross. Okay, what's next? There's a ton of banter from enemies as well as your party members. They never really shut up, to be honest. Every time you start a new map, start a new run, defeat an elite, whatever, somebody has something to say. And it's very repetitive. You'd think each party member would have their own personality or dialogue, but they don't really. They simply repeat the same lines of other characters when traversing the map in a new run. Now, when they're doing their camping stuff and relationship building, yeah, they have unique dialogue, but the majority of what you'll be reading from them is just repeated. The Guardian will say one thing one run, and then the Archon will say the exact same thing the next run. That said, you do have the option to reduce the banter in the settings, so once it starts getting repetitive, you can toggle that function, thankfully, because otherwise you have to click through the banter manually and it just takes way too much time from actually playing the game. And the story isn't all that super anyway, so there's not much there to garner your attention, meh. Now, there were quite a few bugs throughout my time with Star Renegades. There were times when I would have enough fury to do a combo, yet the game just wouldn't do it for some reason. Sometimes on the map, I would get bugs with some of the pickups. One such example was when I went to the armor kiosks. These regenerate the armor of your entire party while also granting you an armor increase to the character of your choice. Problem is, it didn't regenerate any of my armor, none of my party. I did get the armor increase, but not until I defeated the boss on that planet after. So I specifically set it up so I would get that armor kiosk right before the boss, only to have it not work until after I defeated the boss. I was able to win the fight, but it was a nightmare due to having no armor the entire time. Granted, these bugs were few and far between for the most part, so it wasn't a huge deal, but when it happens, you notice it for sure, kind of like when your electricity goes out. At times when you get to the latter planet, there are scene and menu transition delays, meaning when you exit camp or go into camp or exit the squad menu, the screen will go black for several seconds like the game is trying to catch up or something. Just a minor annoyance, never had the game freeze or crash or anything, but it goes back to having lots of instances where the game kind of wastes your time. There are a lot of meta unlocks in Star Renegades, but they aren't much to write home about either. You can unlock some various characters, but then you can unlock progenies of each, which are just the same character with maybe some slight differences in shields or health. The items you unlock are weird because you should be allowed to take one item with you in your inventory at the start of a run after you unlock and activate them, but this rarely worked for me and I would often find my inventory empty when I started a new run. Not sure if it was a bug or what. Speaking of items, I feel the game doesn't reward you enough credits to purchase items at the end of each planet. Vast majority of the time, you'll only have enough cash to buy one item if you get lucky enough to do that. You often might have to choose between getting coins or getting armor or shields, and usually the armor and shields are more important, but you know, what you're gonna do. I think if they bumped up the coin gainage throughout your run, allowing you to buy, say, 2 to 3 items after each planet, then that would help a lot with the BS issues with the bosses, you know, make it less difficult, or less frustrating, I should say. Lastly, again, the length of each run just feels far too long for how punishing the game can be if you don't have the right setup. Going 2 to 4 hours and then dying to some bullshit boss mechanic that you couldn't foresee isn't a particularly enjoyable experience. These long runtimes don't really feel like a roguelite to me. It's almost as if they could have made the game just a standard RPG. It might have suited it more. I suspect they designed it for you to play a little, save, and then come back later, and then save, and then come back later and finish it maybe. I think it would have benefited in having a central hub area where you go out on missions and choose from your character pool each time, rather than having an entire run stuck with the same party that may or may not be effective in the end game or the later planets. So kind of like Escape the Mad Empire, or even the Darkest Dungeon, where you can have your crew that did one mission sit back and recover while you send out another one. I don't know. Maybe if they make a Star Renegades 2, that might be a better option there, but who knows. That said, everything outside of the frustrating elite and boss fights is still pretty enjoyable. I find myself still wanting to do another run despite all the flaws of Star Renegades. I mostly just loathe having to do the final boss fight and the moon-based boss, because fuck that if I don't have the perfect party combination. This is why I say this game gets a side thumb for me. I suspect that some people will hate it, while others will enjoy it enough to want to continue playing despite its problems. I'm in the latter camp. Star Renegades has some really fun and cool mechanics about it, but it's also marred by a lot of balance issues, difficulty spikes, and poor UI. But no game is perfect. As such, I recommend perhaps buying it on sale, which currently, as of writing this script on October 29th of 2025, Star Renegades is 83% off on Steam and going for $4.24 American, with the soundtrack running at 80% off at a staggering $1.39 American. These sales end on November 3rd, 2025, so might want to jump on it, as for that price, I think it's more than worth it, personally, if this looks like something you'll be interested in. But again, highly recommend you play on easy mode at the start, as I did multiple runs on normal when I first started and just wasn't having a good time, ultimately. Then I switched to easy and it became a lot more fun and more fair, I felt. I'm just a casual noob, but eventually I'll go back to normal and I'm sure it'll be much easier now that I understand the game more. And before I let you go, as I do in all my reviews and first impression videos, I'm going to give you a taste of the game's soundtrack by Steve London. This track is called Memories of Menku. Yeah, enjoy. So there you have it, ladies and gents. Star Renegades, pixel art turn-based roguelite for the patient gamer. Going knowing its flaws, and you may have more fun than going in blind. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to help little me out in my gaming YouTube endeavors. This has been Jarek Defiler, swearing at the end boss of Star Renegades. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending on where you are. And go jack up some Imperium scum, yeah.